we have a good flow of the discussion, and we want to keep it as interactive as possible, but we want to make sure that, you know, there's some organization and structure to it as well. So if you could quickly just maybe type in, like, we can see your names, your organization, and where you're what country you're based in right now, that'd be great. um, for some of the users and the participants, could you please make sure that you're not sharing your screen? We want to have the screen for the presenters, so please do check and take out the sharing of the screen. And as much as possible, if we want to request that you could mute your microphones, please. And but we will open the floor for questions. So Mark, who's working with us from the Netherlands right now, will be looking at who's raising their hand or whatever. And if we recognize you and the moderators, the facilitators, point out and call out your name, then um, we'd love to just open your microphone. So we'll take control of that opening of the microphone, just so it doesn't get confusing. Is that all right with everybody? Yeah. All right. So we're gonna start in a few minutes. Um, I still see somebody sharing their screen. Can somebody please unshare your screen? Okay. Mm, all right. Okay. Great. We're getting people from all around the world, eh? US. We got people from India, the Netherlands, from Moldova, Dominica. All right. Great. All right. All right. Good day. Let me just say good day, everybody. This is Jim, and I'm speaking from the Philippines, yeah? And welcome to the first webinar. I'd just like to introduce briefly quickly our group, this group that we just started, and which is a group that's open to everybody, you know. And this is the Gfrost Youth Working Group. Just to give you a quick background, this group started off during the 8th Gfrost annual meeting in Australia, and some of the young people that are here also with me, we started discussing about starting or proposing a youth working group to the steering committee of Gfrost. And cut the long story short, we got the go signal, we got their support, and this is one of our first activities where we want to engage everybody who is interested in engaging youth in RAS and youth with RAS. All right. So can everybody hear me? Yeah? Is it good? All right. So, again, just a basic house rules. If you just came in, we'd love to hear or just get to see on the chat where you're coming from, what country you're based in, what your organization is, and please don't share your screen because we are letting one of our co-facilitators share their screen just so that we were on the same page on the presentations. For the microphones, please keep it muted. Our facilitator, Mark, will be in charge of unmuting microphones at the right time during the open forum for questions and all that. So thank you very much for joining in and listening in. We're very excited to be with you guys right now here in this webinar. So this webinar is the first of a series of webinars that we've actually planned out. And this first webinar basically just wants to start the discussions and trigger and spark the discussions on RAS for youth and youth in RAS, rural advisory services, also known as agriculture extension to some, also known as agriculture extension and advisory services to some people. And we want to start off by laying down the picture maybe of like how can young people get involved with RAS, or how are young people already involved in RAS, and how do we increase that space. So this first webinar would be just to lay down the fundamentals, these basic setting and leveling off that we're on the right page, we're on the same page, everybody around the world. And the next few webinars will be building also on that kind of understanding on how do we engage young people more. So we have two great people who will be speaking today with us. We have Natalie and Alpha. So we have Natalie here, Natalie Ernst. She has a master's in geography and has been working, 10 years. She has 10 years of work experience in international development organizations. She's been working with Gfrost for 4 years now, and she does 50% of her time with Gfrost, and she also does 50% of her time with a startup in Switzerland that addresses food wastes. So we have the second speaker, who is Alpha, here today with us. And Alpha is a Tribagonian farmerpreneur. He's a motivational speaker and agri-youth advocate. Alpha is the founder of YPARD, or We Help Youth Farm, a globally recognized and award-winning nonprofit organization established to creatively promote agriculture among children by increasing their awareness of the world's food problems, and by doing so, grow the future feeders of in the year 2050. So we have two great people sharing their experiences and understanding of RAS, and we don't want to keep you waiting because you've logged in and wanted to hear already from our first speaker. So let me introduce our first speaker, Natalie, who will talk about RAS in youth, RAS for youth, and youth in RAS. So I give you Natalie, who's the program officer of Gfrost. Natalie, the floor is yours.
Yes, hi everyone. Good morning or noon or evening, wherever you are. Can you hear me well? I think so. Yeah, okay. So yeah, welcome to this webinar. I'm very excited to be here. I'm very, very excited to see so many people registered. That is really overwhelming. We didn't expect that actually, so that's really great. So I was giving this task to, sort of bring ourselves on the same page and setting the scene for further discussions. This is a bit challenging to do in 15 minutes, but I will try. And I do hope that later on we can have some discussions, because I see there is a whole lot of great experience here in this virtual room. So I'm sure we can all learn from each other. Next slide, please. Maybe as a first start, I just wanted to ask you, like, what do you think, or how do you define rural advisory services? How are you involved with RAS? I just want you to quickly put yourself on, well, just write some notes in the chat on how you are involved with RAS, on what you are doing, on what you are advising on how you perceive rural advisory services or extension services or agricultural advisory services, however you want to name it. So please just type a couple of answers on what you are doing, just that we see a little bit the broad range of advisory services. I give you some time. We already have one answer there. You can also raise your hand if you want to say something now. There is a raise hand button somewhere in your screen. So please just write in the chat what you are doing and why you would consider yourself as a rural advisor or as an extensionist, or what part of work you would define as being part of a rural advisory services, TORs if you want. Just give it some more time. So we have international development, extension and participatory activities. We have evaluation and participatory research, helping people out there. We get some nice answers. They do also read in the chat. Aspirations, youth employment. A lot of research here. Education, research, and documentation is one definition given. Just give it some more answers. Is someone actually working in the field as an extensionist? Working with, really not in research, but youth in agriculture. Okay, thanks. So the point that I wanted to make here, advocacy. Okay, nice. So what I wanted to just keep writing, that will be interesting also for later on for our records. So what I wanted to make the point on is really that you see that rural advisory services is like much broader than, you know, in the past days when we started, when extension basically was really just a linear approach of, you know, technology transfer from research to the farmer. Next slide, please. As Gfrost sees it now, we really depart from the idea of the agricultural innovation system, where we say that innovation can actually happen everywhere, at all points, in interactions between different actors, between different people in that agricultural innovation system, that basically embraces, you know, research, education, classic extension, farmers organization, input suppliers, agri-processors, transporters, and of course is influenced by the regulatory system, like by policies, the context, the national, regional context where you are in, etc. And we really perceive rural advisory services or extension as being the brokers in that whole agricultural innovation system. We really think that the role of the extensionist today, or of the rural advisor today, is to, you know, make sure that to facilitate actually between this, in this complex system and in this complex, you know, system. So next slide, please. Gfrost defines really rural advisory services as all the different activities that provide the information and services needed and demanded by farmers and other actors in rural settings. Rural advisory services assist them in developing their own technical, organizational, and management skills and practices to improve their livelihoods and well-being. So it's really about, you know, improving livelihoods and well-being. It's not just about productivity and income anymore. And it also sort of considers that rural advisory services nowadays are increasingly asked to take up further roles in supporting rural households. That can be on health, that can be on gender, nutrition, how to deal with risk, help with farm management, support farmers in the use of ICTs. It's a really, really broad range that the rural advisory services nowadays are actually asked to do. Next slide, please. So the question really is now, are we expecting superheroes? Are we expecting rural advisory services to, be able to fulfill all that? Can one single person go to a farm household and do risk management, gender, health, nutrition advice, plus, still the classical part of productivity and income increase, etc.? And the answer is no. Next slide, please. We are not expecting new superheroes, because we did sort of developed that concept or that new mindset of the new extensionist, which means actually really that we, sort of embrace that whole technology, that whole change from technology transfer to this broker role, as I mentioned. We do also recognize or realize that there are various actors in the agricultural innovation system, and that there is a pluralistic RAS system. So there are different actors in there, and they all have different roles, and the ideal case would be that these different roles are, understood by everyone and actually lived, and that, coordinated, and that the efforts that go towards a rural actor, farmers and others, is actually coordinated by the different actors, and that everyone is doing what they do best. So that's the new extensionist. And it also goes beyond strengthening just individual skills, but we really see that in order for that new paradigm or that new mindset to work, we need new capacities, both at individual level, but also at organizational level, and also at system level. So the next slide, please. So now, what is Gfrost? Gfrost is the Global Forum for Rural Advisory Services, as mentioned earlier. And instead of telling you too much on, that dry vision, mission, and strategic fields, I thought I'd just give you a little bit an overview on what people said that Gfrost is. We asked people at the last Gfrost annual meeting on what they think of Gfrost, and you have a couple of answers here. Says Gfrost is a collecting voice for all the networks that are globally championing RAS, or the more we develop in every country, agriculture has a different, unique personality, and there has to be somebody that guides that whole thing, like a maestro or so, she said. I think that Gfrost is like the maestro for me, that for all that is happening. Or another answer that we had, that it's really, connecting, meeting rural people around the globe that I can now be able to reach out to. So it's really a network. It's really a network, next slide please, that was formed because we have seen that rural advisory services are key to rural development, but they have a limited voice at global level. They lack evidence, well, there is a lack of evidence-based advice on policies, approaches, investments, etc. There is a limited experience sharing at local, regional, and also global level. And there is a lack of individual, organizational, and institutional capacity. So it's really about, forming that network and really bringing that sort of this whole question of coordinating a bit more prominently on a page. So next slide. So as I said, I won't go into detail. So the Gfrost mission is really to provide advocacy and leadership on pluralistic and demand-driven rural advisory services, and with the vision to actually effectively contribute, or see RAS to effectively contribute to sustainable development. Next slide, please. We work on 3 areas. One is advocacy and support. One is really the whole question of professionalization and capacity strengthening of individuals, organizations, and the system. And one is really this knowledge generation and exchange. Next. So now the big question for this webinar here, where do youth come in here? So next slide, please. For us, or just to give you some statistics that I'm sure you all have seen already from FAO and YPARD from 2014, the global youth population is at 1.3 billion in 2050. as estimated, with the majority in developing countries, and an estimated 55% are in rural areas. And there is, of course, or there are, of course, conditions of underemployment and poverty. Next slide. So if you look at those statistics, it's sort of clear that youth have a big role to play in addressing global concerns, including the SDGs. And with 55 of them living in rural areas, I think especially in terms of, agriculture and rural development. However, they do sort of lack access to a whole lot of services and knowledge and skills and infrastructure to fulfill actually this role that they would have. And also, given that the global dynamics, including rural-urban dynamics, agriculture has become sort of a very unattractive sector for many young people. This is also due to that bad, stigma that is given to agriculture by the society, peers, media, parents. And one key challenge really is that addressing youth is not something that can be treated as a, youth cannot be treated as a heterogeneous group. It's very difficult because if you address youth, you address gender, you address community dynamics, you address intergenerational dynamics, etc. So you can't just say youth is youth, because a young student in a city that has a total different reality and totally different needs than a young woman, for example, in a rural community. So this makes addressing youth very complex. And then there is a disconnection between the training provided by rural advisory services and the training needed by youth. Next slide, please. But at the same time, there is a trend for higher incomes, for improved education, for urbanization, for better connectivity and infrastructure, the spread of ICTs, and also with all that changing mobility, which actually all leads to new opportunity also for skilled remunerative work in agri-food system. Next slide. So the point that we want to make here, I guess, is really that agriculture is not just farming, because there are like really a lot of super perfect, as we say, opportunities along the whole value chain. So for youth to get involved in agriculture, because as I said, being involved in agriculture does not just mean farming. It can be involved in policies, in education, in research, in farming and finance, in extension and RAS, in communications, and in technology and trade, and along the whole value chain, not just at production, but also, from the production to actually the consumer at the end. And also in this whole, along the whole value chains and along this whole opportunities, there are different disciplines needed. There are all sorts of disciplines needed. There are mathematicians needed. There are, social workers needed. There are, there is like a whole lot of entry points actually for youth to be involved in agriculture in the broad sector. Next slide. So RAS can actually play a key role in helping youth seizing this opportunity, but they need to change their approach and ways they work with youth. And of course, the impact that rural advisory services can have on youth and on people's livelihood does depend on other trends. However, there is a lot of things that RAS actually can and should do for linking actually youth to that whole development. So they can actually help linking better to the youth people's aspirations. Very often, as mentioned before, young people are not understood. The training provided by RAS is not actually responding to the needs and demands that young people have. They can help dealing with macro level environment, which young people live and work, meaning they can help, with conflict management. They can help with all these functional skills that people need to have when they work in complex, difficult environments. They can, of course, facilitate the whole service provision. When we talk about agripreneurship, for example, it's not possible that a single extensionist can help give all the advice a young person needs when he wants to set up his own business, but he can link to the different services that a young person needs. He can foster young people's participation in shaping agricultural and rural development, meaning also they can help actually strengthen rural organizations, so to provide their voice. They can also help ensuring that young women, of course, benefit from rural advisory services. And of course, there is the very classical type of work that the rural advisory services do, which is education and training for young people. Next slide, please. So, on the other hand, with all these complex tasks and complex or challenging tasks for rural advisory services, one thing that really needs to come out is that young people themselves can play a really key role in actually providing advice to young people, so being extensionists themselves, because they do understand you young people, they do understand their needs and demands, they speak the same language, they exactly understand it from where they come and where they want to go to. So the opportunities for actually engaging youth in extension and in rural advisory services and therewith create win-win situations is really, really big. And I think this is really also why we do want to, you know, engage you and see you actually as a role, having a role in RAS. Next slide. Just very shortly to close. So where is youth and Gfrost? What is the link in there? So we published a youth issue paper last year and had the Gfrost annual meeting 2017 on that topic, with the result of actually the youth working group being created that we are having here. So that's a direct output. Next slide, please. And next slide. We can talk about the youth working group a little bit later on anyways. So we really want to encourage you to, you know, join this movement and be part of the change and see where in these perfect opportunities you can fit to take up your role as a, you know, changing actor in our world and for the future. So I thank you for that, and I hand over directly, I think, to Alpha, or well, back to the moderator, actually. Thanks.
All right. Thank you very much, Natalie. All right. We actually got a lot in that, really a lot of content within that time. And we want to open the floor to maybe 2 questions right now in relation to what Natalie just presented. So if you do have any question, you could raise your hand, or you could type your question on the chat box, and Natalie could actually just address that question once we see it come up on the chat box. Yeah, so you're free to type in your question right now, and we'd love to hear from you. What can you say? What do you want to ask about? If there's any comment or anything like on that matter. Right. Okay. Well, if you don't have any questions yet, I would say that we could move to the next speaker, Alpha. Okay, here, there's one question right here.
Oh, the question on the definition of the youth. Yes, we discussed this just before the webinar, and it's true, we didn't actually include on purpose the definition of youth. You know, there are the formal definition of youth, like from the UN or from other organizations, but for me personally, for that presentation, and from my experience, I'm not a big fan of these rigid definitions of youth, because when you think of the definition of youth being between 16 and 24, let's say, that's like the UN definition, I think. I mean, people 25 years old up to 30 years old is exactly the moment when they enter their professional career. And that's where they need like a lot of support as well. So if you just take this rigid age definition of youth, then you get very, you know, then you start thinking in a box, and you don't maybe consider, you know, the whole actually picture that you need to look at. So that's maybe just a short answer to that, but I'm sure we can discuss as well.
Yeah, we still have some other questions, Natalie. You might want to address some.
Mm-hmm. So I think the questions on how youth can be engaged with Gfrost, that's part of the idea and the purpose of the webinar as well, and we can come to that also later on. I think in the next webinar as well, and later in the discussions, it's really and I would like to, maybe Mark can answer actually that question later, or even the youth working group, you, Jim. Yeah, so there are a couple of questions on that. ICTs. Yeah, so that's all for the working group. So I think, I don't know, Jim, whether you guys from the working group actually can take the word. From our side, maybe just as a short notice from Gfrost, please do join the working groups, and please bring in your own ideas. It's really, we want this group to be open for everyone, and we want this group to be really responding to the needs of youth. So we don't want to have a group where we decide from a top-down approach how and what we are doing. We want to get to have you guys who set the priorities and define what is needed most by young people all over the world related to advisory services. So you can just for how to sign up for the group, I think Jim or Mark, you guys will tell that later on, right? So yeah, that as a short answer.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Natalie.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much. We actually have the youth working group, which is one of the reasons why we actually established the youth working group, is so that people from around the world engaged in RAS can, there's kind of like a coordination system that we want to set up. It's easier for us to communicate on initiatives on youth in RAS. But later on that one, we'll continue for now to our next speaker, and then you can raise again. We can go back to the discussion on how to be engaged with the youth working group, and we'd love to open the discussion for everybody to just, you know, pitch in and see how we can learn from each other and how we can better engage each other and youth in RAS. So without in the interest of time, I'm now handing the floor to Alpha, who is the founder and executive director of YFarm, or We Help Youth Farm. So Alpha, the floor is yours.
Okay, greetings. Thank you very much, Jim. Thank you for the introduction. Excellent job to Natalie for starting it off. I must say, exciting questions are coming in, and I'm happy to be here to share, you know, this morning with you, well, my morning, some of my experiences, and let's get into some of the opportunities that exist in RAS for young people, and, you know, give some examples of let's couple young people across the world that are doing some really innovative things in RAS using innovation. So my format of my presentation would take more or less going into, you know, what got me to this point of developing YFarm, what got me to the point of working in extension, and you know, one of the things that you will see coming across is, you know, me being able to use creativity to reach my audiences who I serve as a advisory service agent. So we can move on. So my journey started, it sort of started with graduating from the University of the West Indies, where I did a minor in agricultural communication and extension. And I did a major in agribusiness and also a minor in entrepreneurship. And I graduated with first class honors and I was the valedictorian of my faculty. So that, you can move, next slide, that had me sort of in a bit of in a bit of dilemma in terms of what do I choose for my postgraduate studies, because being graduating as one of the top students, I had lecturers from the agricultural economics department pulling me to that side. Come on, Alpha, come and do economics. And then I had, extension lecturers asking me to sort of work with them. And I sort of wanted to lean towards the extension side of things. So move next slide. So, and then it hit me that what I took a moment to realize, like, what do I actually want to do? And I wanted to help farmers. I wanted to add value to the activity. I wanted to work with young people. I wanted to get more people excited about agriculture. And I wanted to prove to them that extension is a profession. Because while trying to choose between economics or extension, there would have been a lot of rumors to what extension is about, and it doesn't, some cases it doesn't make sense. Is extension really doing anything for agriculture? So I sort of wanted to prove them wrong and show them that an extension is needed to increase agricultural productivity. So there I ended up choosing the agricultural extension. Next slide. And I started searching for different opportunities, and how, because I knew that to be in extension, it couldn't be the typical extension where you feel you graduate from the university and then you could go on the field and tell farmers, do this, don't do that, do this, don't do that. I know that we had to add value. You must add value to the service which you provide to them. And I attended a training in India, and we were looking at agricultural entrepreneurship and supply chain management. And interesting enough, I started learning about NGOs that help farmers in India. And one of the examples that really stood out to me was that they had a mobile soil testing bus. And I found that to be so cool and so in line with where my mind was in terms of being an extensionist and adding value to farmers. So here it is, they can go on the farm with this bus, test their soil, and not just go there, look at the soil and say, you need this, you need that, but actually test them and give them some rapid response results. So there, while in India, I wrote down the word Y farm, and the acronym at that time, it meant we help you farm. Move on. So, and as I continued my search then, or my quest to add some different value into extension, I wrote a piece called Extending Ag Extension. And as you would see on the screen here, it had a design, and it was a poem. So I realized that the attractive messages, it's much easier to read and sort of telling a story. And of course, I used it on social media, and it did a good job. I didn't expect it to do such a good job in terms of reaching out to the masses of people and people sharing it around, and I realized that I started to find a way in which I could reach young people using creativity in ag extension. Move on. So then again, it sort of occurred to me, and of course this is a process in which I'm taking you through, that the problem is creating youth engagement, right? And the solution is creatively engaging youth. So one of those things that the problem is the solution. And of course, why creative engagement? Because there's a decline in youth in agriculture. And why you want to creatively engage youth? To increase youth participation in agriculture. Next slide. And as we are presently, well, in the year 2018, and we know some of the statistics. I wouldn't go too much into this. That farmers are aging. By the year 2050, they would be deceased. Our young 30-year-old farmers, the very few that we have, they will be retired by the year 2050. And it's the 10-year-olds, the 5 to 10-year-olds are the ones that will be the professionals by the year 2050. And the major question is that, who will feed 9 billion people by the year 2050? Next slide. And then, when we look at what are these 10-year-olds thinking about, they're thinking about all the other professions except being an agriculturist, except being an agricultural extensionist or agricultural economist or, scientist or using technology. So as I said before, there's a steady decline in youth in agriculture. Next slide. And, so this question here is one which I would usually pose to when we go around to schools then, that, who would choose agriculture? And for the sometimes, you have like 2% of the person saying they would. So then I would ask the class, then should we all be eating insects? And I know insects, we have been starting to rear insects and whatnot, but should we be eating it all the time, or would everyone eat insects? Of course it's like a joke, but then it's like a reality as well too. If we don't farm, maybe we'll end up eating insects. Next slide. And so, we realized that we had to do something to make agriculture, in order to have increased youth participation in agriculture. So, the story has been told. Next slide. So, it was there like a light bulb hit me that, I found my way of how I'm going to add value to extension, how I'm going to add value to people. And it was like extension for kids, like extension directly dealing with kids. Yeah, next slide. Yeah, extension directly dealing with kids to creatively engage the youth. So as you would see here, we started to design comic books, coloring books, storybooks, using poetry, using multimedia to ensure that the messages are creative, convenient, they are attractive, they are simple, they are friendly, reader friendly, and they are fun. And of course, it's past the time where we could take a big textbook and go and try to encourage these youths to participate in agriculture. So we must make it colorful. We must make it really, really friendly, to really using the things that they like now to capture them. Next slide. So, some of you here on the platform may have known about this invention, and this is what is my brainchild, and this is what is my extension tool to reach out to this younger generation. So we thought about, we realized that there must be an adventure to encourage youth in agriculture, starting with a main character who's branded as the world's most powerful food provider. And ladies and gentlemen, we introduced the first food and nutrition security superhero in the world called Agriman. And Agriman, of course, will be focusing on planting one tree, eating local, getting kids to eat healthy, zero wastage, making them understand climate change, because, we can't wait until university to learn about food security. And nor can we wait till we get a PhD to learn about climate change adaptability. So Agriman's motto is growing future feeders from the ground up. Next slide. So, and here, of course, we would take the messages of Agriman to the schools. Agriman would go to the schools, go to the career days. In some parts of the world, when you have career days, you don't have anyone representing agriculture, because they simply just don't see it to be a profession. So we started to change that by making Agriman go into the schools, and just for knowledge, we are now introducing a superhero, a female superhero, to add to the story. She's now being designed, and we are getting feedback from the youths on the design and what she should do. And her name is Photosynthesista. Next slide. And of course, we have our Agriman fan club where kids would meet regularly to keep, to ensure that the program is sustainable on the farm, in the classroom, go to different farms, connect with other kids from all over the world. So it's called the Agriman fan club. Next slide. So what is interesting with my journey is that as a youth RAS agent, we have an acronym for it. We call it Rasta Youth. I realized that I have the ability to reach even wider audiences, and I am an extension agent. Because one of the things which I do, I advocate for youth in agriculture. I advocate for food and nutrition security all over the globe. So this picture here shows me giving a closing keynote address at the Global Thought for Food Summit, and that was held in Amsterdam last year. Next slide. And then this one here, which was, you know, like sort of like the pinnacle of our success thus far, was given a TEDx talk in Amsterdam. And here you can see Agriman on stage with me, and we are sharing the story. And could you imagine how much people we would reach, you know, in getting and being able to do talks like this to promote food security, to sensitize the public about eating healthy, to sensitize them about not wasting food. You know, TEDx talks, they usually reach almost millions of people when the video is posted on YouTube. And in the audience here, this was also in Amsterdam last November, we had almost 1,500 to 2,000 persons live. Next slide. So what I would like to share now is that the opportunities that exist for extension. You know, how much people would have think about, hey, creating a superhero that could reach young people. And this falls within the food value chain because it's about promotion and awareness and advocacy. And we cannot neglect such key elements of agriculture because we just need to sensitize our public. So my challenge to you then is that, you know, we look beyond the primary production. It's something that Natalie also mentioned as well, that agriculture is more than just farming. You know, so look beyond the primary production aspect and come up with these creative ideas, whether it may be in the processing or distribution or retail or, you know, ICTs or whatnot, to find a way where you could add value to, and not only think about farmers. You know, I think we have a misconception, I would kind of say, that extension must only deal with farmers. What about the household? What about the children? What about the schools? You know, who's talking to the farmer's family? Sometimes they go through stress. So all this is opportunities where we could see our extension being provided. Next slide. And now I wanted to just use two simple examples, yet innovative examples, of how young people are actually reaching, you know, being rural advisory service agents. And in this case here, I'm going to quickly tell you about the Agribusiness TV, which some of you may have an idea of it already, you know. So this was set up by Nosheen Hussein Ali and her husband. And they are based in Burkina Faso in Africa. And they are using storytelling via video, you know, ICTs and creativity to tell stories on social media about the young agribusinesses that are developed throughout Africa. And you know, the screenshot of this video here, they have received almost over 700,000 views for this video here, which is a story about three brothers in Benin. And they have designed new technologies for processing. And you know, I asked Nosheen, you know, what made this video so popular, you know, to be their most viewed video. And she said it's all about the story, their storyline, the way Agribusiness TV packages their story. You know, it really went viral. And of course, some of their content are in French. So this is just an example here of how, you know, Agribusiness TV, they are acting as a rural advisory service agent and reaching the young people through creativity and storytelling via social media. Next slide. So, and then here now I have, this is a young man called Johanan Dujon. He's from St. Lucia, and what he did was definitely innovative. He took the sargassum seaweed and turned it into a biofertilizer, fully organic. And he developed his own fertilizer from waste, because as you know, seaweed that appears on the seashores, it's, you know, the world have been trying to figure out a way to solve this problem. And he's now turned it into a profitable business, and he goes around and help farmers increase their productivity. And of course, using advice, you know, of course, he advised them as well as he go into the field to actually, to get them to adopt that technology of the seaweed product. And that, to me, you know, that is such a brilliant idea of things that young people are actually doing. Next slide. So, here, we come to a point to realize that, wait, RAS can strengthen young people capacity, and youth can strengthen RAS creativity. So if you ask me, where I think we as young people fit is that we must bring our creative juices into RAS. We must bring that innovation and not only think out the box, but destroy that box that China might exist, thinking that, we just have to go on the field, tell the farmers to do this, tell them to do that. Find innovative ways to get that to them, to get that across to them. So this is where we come in to strengthen us through our creativity that all lie inside us. Next slide. So of course, now these are just some examples, that was to the top of my head while preparing this presentation. And of course, there are maybe so many more of places where young people could find themselves and to become a RAS youth. Of course, promotion and training in agripreneurship. As we would know that, young people today, they are more excited about agripreneurship, adding value or agricultural entrepreneurship than primary production, creating products, creating new systems, coming up with new innovations to make farming easier. So that is there are many opportunities there. Also, who's financially advising our farmers? So as I said, a lot of times we just think about just simply telling them farm this, farm that, don't do that, add that, use this fertilizer, don't use this fertilizer. But what about record keeping? What about financial advisory? Of course, building ICTs and building apps for farmers, helping farmers with value addition. What about designing record keeping systems to help farmers to make their work easier? Design a system, maybe, and then maybe some of these things which I'm talking about maybe already exist. But I just wanted to sort of get our brains active and get it thinking in an innovative way and how we could come up with the next innovation. What about using music or drama production to teach farmers? Using theater. What about finding easier systems to help them sell their produce? What about nutritional innovation to promote healthier lifestyles to the public? What about designing innovations that promote zero wastage? Like designing campaigns or advocacy things that promotes zero wastage. So these are just some examples to get our brains going in the right direction. Next slide. And right, so here it is now. I would make the call. I know Natalie made the call as well, but it would be not good of me if I don't make the call for our audience today to join the Gfrost Youth Working Group. And I want to take the time to say a special thank you to Natalie. At the last Gfrost meeting in Australia, she really gave us the push and made the plea with the steering committee so that we could actually be able to get this group working. And, it was selected that our focal point person is Jim Cano, who is our moderator today. And I decided to, place his email here so that people can directly write him. And I guess we will discuss after how we would actually be able to join the youth working group. And my little motto today is that, let's utilize extension and become a RAS youth. Next slide. So to wrap up, I want to say thank you very much for joining, and of course, I think we might have a few minutes remaining for some questions. So thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much, Alpha. Very informative and full of content presentation. I hope that got everybody thinking and all those creative juices getting triggered. From those who are listening right now. All right, so we had two presenters today. We had Natalie talk about Gfrost, talk about youth in RAS in general, and we had Alpha share his experiences on how young people can actually be engaged and can have an active involvement in rural advisory services. So right now, we'd love to open the floor for questions, and we just want to get feedback. We want this to be an open discussion. Everybody can pitch into the discussion, and you can just type in your questions right now through the chat box, or you could, I see somebody raising their hand, Mark. can we get can we get that person to speak up, or at least to, okay, Musa, you can actually type in your question as well if you have any questions at all. Yeah, the microphone's open for you, Musa. You can raise your question right now. Hello? Hello, Musa, are you, can you hear me clearly? All right, maybe there's some technical difficulty right now. Mark, can we open the floor for Stacy instead? Stacy, you can actually raise your question right now.
Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Oh, great. Great.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Alpha. I loved your energy. Something that comes to mind for me, having worked with young people on extension projects in Sierra Leone and in Ghana, is that there seems to be some resources floating around for some select few young people to get involved in extension through projectized development, so through funder projects. But a big problem across the board with extension is getting resources that are, to actually be able to get any extensionist out into the field delivering services. So I'm really curious, Alpha, if you have seen kind of business models or kind of potentially more resource sustainable ways, and I'm talking about money primarily, for young people to be involved in service provision or to actually create income for themselves that don't depend on a donor project.
Okay.
All right, go
okay.
ahead, Alpha.
Yeah. Thank you for that question, Stacy. Yeah, from my, so I would just use my model as an example. So what we have done with building, let's say, the Agriman Adventures, which is a project out of YFAM, and YFAM is an NGO. We have developed tools or developed merchandises, for example, a comic book, and the coloring book, and we would have people support us financially to do workshops and to do trainings and to do talks. So in other words, then we have built merchandises out of our project so that it can sort of help us support us in our endeavors. So having said that, I think an example to answer your question might just be developing certain products. For example, as I mentioned before, with the young man from St. Lucia with the Algas Organics, he built that product, so he can now earn revenue from that while he is still assisting farmers on the ground. Thank you. I hope that sort of briefly answers you.
I'd like to pitch in on that question also, Stacy. One of the models that I've seen here in the Philippines is that there's a group that positions itself as a consulting firm, and they actually do consult. They have this service provided to marginal communities, fishermen and farmers, but they don't charge it to the farmers, right? They don't charge it to the farmers. They don't charge their services rather to the farmers or the fishermen. They actually get industry partners to fund their consulting services. So what happens is they actually help the farmers and fishermen increase their capacity to market their products, and the industry partners provide also that funding. So I think there's a lot of room for innovation to come in on how to develop resources and income streams depending on either products or services. Yeah, just to add on to also what Alpha's been doing in Y Farm. Okay, so we'd love to hear from Musa, who's actually raised the hand on the chat box. Hello, Musa, are you there? Okay, we still don't have any answer so far. Can we get on to Festus instead?
Festus, good afternoon, everybody.
Hello.
Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, this is Festus from Nigeria. Thank you, Alpha, for that wonderful presentation. So I'll just type in and wanted to share with you some of the things of what we actually did that is in line with what you're doing. We noticed that changing the mindset of these young people from primary and secondary school is the best way to go about having them involved in agriculture. So one thing we did was to go to some secondary schools, liaise with their authorities and organize some seminar and talks where we're able to talk to these young people. And from there, before we started talking to them, we actually decided to know what their aspirations were at that time. Based on some of the even things the field that you raised, some of them, a lot of them wanted to be medical doctors, engineers, lawyers, and what have you. Well, maybe one or two wanted to have anything to do with agriculture. But later on, we discussed with them, show them what they can be or who they can be as a young farmer, a sexy farmer, like we used to call it, how they can feed the world, and all sort of things and opportunities there in agriculture. We see that a lot of them are beginning to change their mindset to, have something to do with agriculture. But now, what I wanted to just ask is this. Would it be possible to have a very strong partnership, maybe with different organizations, with some of the things we are thinking about? If we decide to have a program like summer program for young people, where we'll be able to camp them, have them do something practical about agriculture, I think that will go a long way in changing their mindset. Would there be an opportunity to develop something strong in this regard?
Alpha, you can respond to that.
The question itself, it came across a little blurred. Jim, maybe could you just say the question? I didn't get it clear. It was breaking up on my end. Sorry.
Okay, Festus, could you please repeat that one for us, please?
The question.
What I was saying is, would it be possible to have a program designed by different organizations? Now that we have Gfrost now and we have different organizations here, in such a way, I'm recommending that if we have a young or kid summer camp where young people can be brought together, be trained, have a lot of activities based on these comic books that you have designed, and we can train them on how they can be involved in agriculture. This is something tangible during these camping exercises. I think it's going to go a long way in changing young people's mindset also.
Okay, yes, yes. Thank you for that comment and that question. Definitely, the answer is yes to that. So one of the things which I didn't mention was that we have launched in different countries. So we actually have our country rep for Zambia on the line with us here today. Shepherd is there, and so I am gonna leave my email in the box there. And those of you, I see some of our people are interested in talking more. And you could write me and we could discuss more on how we could go about doing this. Maybe getting some of the comic books for some of your camps over there, some of our materials, or having an agreement over there in your respective countries. So thank you for that suggestion. Comment.
All right, thank you very much. I think we've reached this part of the webinar where we have to wrap up as well. It's been an awesome time together, and well, just to wrap up and all on this webinar, we actually had Natalie again to lay down the bigger picture of Gfrost and RAS in engagement with youth, and Alpha to also shed some light on some experiences on that. We're very happy to actually get everybody involved with the youth working group. So I'm actually sharing right now here on the chat box a link to a Slack group. So Slack is an online platform. It's kind of like, you could imagine like it's a virtual office. So we've actually set this up, and you could join in Slack. And this is one way for us to get the ball rolling on the youth working group. And the long-term idea is that we actually get youth representations, or people who are actually involved with youth initiatives and RAS in different parts of the world, to actually be on that Slack group and start discussing, and all these ideas coming up even in the open forum, the youth summer camp, the increasing of revenue streams. These are things that we can continue to discuss and actually talk about, learning from each other. How are we going to really effectively engage young people and with different contexts? So I encourage everybody to actually get onto Slack, the Slack group, which you can see on the link right now here in the chat box. That is our Slack group for the Gfrost Youth Working Group. All right, so this is just the first of many of webinars. We are actually planning 2 or 3 more webinars for the year. The next one should come about 1 or 2 months after, and we are focusing that webinar on policy advocacy as well. How do we utilize policy advocacy in setting up an environment where young people can be effectively engaged in rural advisory services, and many other discussions around that policy sphere. We are also talking about like gender involvement and all these other, we have lots of topics that are in line, and we will be keeping in touch, giving you details on the upcoming webinars once we have those ready. So to remind everybody, we are opening the group. Basically, you can join in on that Slack group rather. Be involved with the youth working group, and we'd love to hear more from you. We'd love to start the discussions and get the ball rolling all around the world on youth in rural advisory services. So thank you very much. This is a great start for all of us, and this is a great start for everybody to start discussing on how we can utilize extension and become RAS youth, as Alpha would say. So thank you very much. We will be keeping in touch, and this is the end of our webinar for today. Thank you very much. Have a great day, everybody.